I had a tough week this week. It's the anniversary week of my little brother's passing away here. It's been several years back now, but there's this bizarre psychological thing that always happens where the whole week ends up feeling off no matter how much I know it's coming. I mean, I know it's coming. I know when the thing went down. It's a pretty memorable event in the history of our family. And I'm good. I'm good with it. This thing happened when my brother was 18 years old. In 1998, he died in a car accident with three friends. He took his younger buddy to go and get his driver's license in Greeley, Colorado, and the kid got his driver's license. And then, they went out driving. Literally within like 10 minutes, the young kid with the new driver's license made an enormous mistake. That's what it looks like, at least. And he went through a stop sign and into traffic on a highway, and he got hit. And all four of the kids, including my brother, passed away in that accident. It's one of those, before the accident, after the accident events by which people like me divide their lives, by which people like my parents and my sister divide our lives. And so, yeah, it's just odd because, you got to process through that. Probably almost every one of you listening to this has dealt with a tragedy or a death or a loss as well. You get it. There's a whole process to it where you get things from a place of stuff makes sense to nothing makes sense. And what do I do with this emotionally, to a place of that's kind of put back together. But then there are these things that come up, something in a TV show, in a book, in a story, driving by a place, a memory, a smell, or one thing that's hardwired into every single year in the rhythm of life is the rhythm of the seasons and the way the part of the year when that horrible thing happened felt, the way the air feels that time of year, the way the color palette of that time of year. For me, it's October, so it's a very distinct time of year. And I just kind of get into a little bit of a funk, and I know my parents do. It's really, really difficult for them. And every year, I feel like, no, I'm good. Like, I'm at peace with it. I miss him, and that hurt, and it was lousy. But I'm maybe not. I don't know. I get a little bit snippier with people than I normally am other times. And my thoughts aren't quite as clear as maybe they are other times. And so I brought it up with my buddy who some of you met, at least internet met. His name's Aaron. We were pastors together in Nebraska for a while, and he never met my brother. I got to be friends with Aaron after my brother had already passed away. And yeah, but he knows the story. He knows how it affects me, and we're good friends with each other, and we're really honest about stuff. So I called him up this week, and it was just like, man, I don't know. I'm in a funk. I'm having a tough time. And I think maybe this is kind of eating at me, and I have internet stuff to do, and I'm excited to do it. I really like what I get to do, but this is on my mind. He said something really smart. He said, well, death is not natural. And of course, my first instinct was the same as your first instinct. Well, yes, it is. It's the most natural thing of all. But I knew what he meant, and we talked about it a little more, and he didn't need to clarify it. I knew what he meant. He was saying that life is bittersweet. It feels off that something this beautiful and meaningful and transcendent, and the kind of connection that you can experience with another person, that can go away. It's off. It's upside down. It's weird. It isn't how things should be. And of course, he's referencing back to the Christian understanding of human existence, the Christian understanding, the biblical understanding of everything about how reality is, how history is unfolded, which is that God, who's outside of time, made things instead of not making things, made creatures in his image, us, instead of not making creatures in his image. And the way the narrative goes, whether you take that as myth or metaphor or literal, either way, it communicates the same thing, that life and flawless life eternally is what we're built for, is part of what it is to be made in the image of God. And then for whatever reason, whether because God ordained it in advance or people picked it or whatever people might want to make of it, things go awry in the early going of this historical story or myth, depending on the ways that different people read it. And all of a sudden, failure is introduced into the equation. And it's not just failure that makes God mad and then he wants to punish people. It's failure that takes a perfect system and unperfects the system. And death is logically, and according to the text, the outgrowth of that. Different groups, different religions, different societies have different ways of articulating this, different stories that go along with the advent of death. But most groups have some kind of accounting for where this came from. There's a notion that there was something better before, that maybe there's something better later, but that death is this strange, curious thing that we all know will happen to us eventually, but that shocks us every time it happens to somebody else. And then the grief and the disorientation that comes with that is something that different groups account for in different ways, of course. And there's not much potency, I guess, to a religion if it doesn't address the most fundamental crisis that's bearing down on people all the time. And that is that we have a clock, that we got a buffer bar that starts filling up from the moment that we're born, and it seems like life will go on forever, but that thing is still ticking up. And then eventually you start doing the mental math on how much ticking up happens in most people's lifetimes. And you look at people you love and you see them getting a little older, or maybe you see them taken from you in a tragedy prematurely. And that messes with your buffer bar and your perception of things. And any religion that can't speak to that, it goes away because it's not addressing the thing, the pressure that is acting on all of us all of the time. And we have these little moments where, you go to a funeral, you watch something that's really moving on TV. I think my little boy discovered death in a new way tonight. We watched that, what's it called? My Octopus Teacher on Netflix. It's a beautiful documentary about a guy who meets an octopus, and he keeps on going swimming in the ocean to see the octopus, and they forge this relationship. But octopi have very short lifespans, and so I'm not trying to ruin the thing. They kind of explain it in the first couple minutes of the show, but death is going to be part of a nature story. And my little guy, I could hear him breathing heavy as it became more obvious that there was going to be loss in this documentary. I called him over, and he cuddled up so tight. And I feel the tears coming down on my arms, and I'm just hugging him as tight as I can without crushing the kid. And he is hugging back really hard. And I realized that he was thinking about something other than the octopus. And when the show ended, I was like, hey, you sad the octopus died? Yeah, I am. And I'm sorry if I ruined that story for you, but it's really obvious where it goes. And he said, yeah, and more than that. I'm like, yeah, does it make you think about more than just that animals die? Yeah. And he didn't want to say anything more about it than that. And he was cuddled up close for a very, very long time and cried together about it. Felt good to kind of cry about the stuff that I hadn't cried about this week. Maybe I'm crying about my brother. Maybe I'm crying about an octopus. I don't know. Maybe, just like my buddy Aaron said, I'm crying because I'm feeling the same thing that my kid was feeling tonight, and that is that death is wrong. This does not feel intuitively or even rationally like the way the story should end. And as gloomy as this conversation has sounded, I think back to what we looked at in Matthew 11, and I do apologize for the tone of this. I'm recording it very, very late at night here after a pensive week and a pensive evening. But, I think back to when John the Baptist in Matthew 11 is asking Jesus about whether or not he is the one. Like, are you the one? And we focused on that as we talked about it all about like fulfillment of prophecy and the Messiah and all of this, religious language. But at the most basic level, what is that question? Are you the one who defeats death? Are you the one who takes this thing that feels so out of place and not like how these stories should end and flips that around and deals with the thing that we just cannot address. And Jesus answers him, we covered it like 5 different times, but he's like, hey, go back and report to John what you heard, that the blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cured, the deaf hear, the good news is preached to the poor. And then right there toward the end is, and the dead are raised. That's the kicker. God is held out as being master of life and death, and that there's an answer for this thing that, whether it's October for me or another time of year for you, or some other sad show that sneaks up on you emotionally with your kids, or the My Octopus Teacher for my kid, the death question that looms and that lingers is addressed repeatedly all over the Bible and all throughout Christian theology. And at times, maybe because of our resistance to thinking about mortality, that can become cliche, like, oh, eternal life and da-da-da-da, stuff you say at funerals, and maybe lies we tell ourselves that we've only halfway thought through to feel better about getting old or about dying or about loss. But there's something very uniquely meaningful about the idea that in this religion, which I think is the true one, the God character dies. He goes where we're going first. And then the God character defeats death. And then the story is held out as such that, well, that's where those who are in this kingdom are going as well. And so I know I don't sound incredibly hopeful because I'm a little raw emotionally, but I find such solace in that. And I don't think lazily. I don't know, maybe you can make of me whatever you would like on that point. I don't think I lie to myself to make myself feel better about dying, but I do think this text is compelling. And let's just cut to the chase, my friends. Part of the reason it's compelling is because it addresses the question you are thinking about, that everybody is thinking about. It addresses the timeline question, the what happens question. What's the point? Where do we go? Why do we matter? Do we last beyond this question? And it answers it in a way that provides a whole lot of context and a whole lot of credibility and a whole lot of rationality behind a question that makes us feel otherwise very irrational. I find hope in this. And even as I sat there and cuddled my crying kid tonight, this was the backdrop against which I felt great about comforting him, because death hurts, because death is off. It feels like a glitch in the matrix, but the Bible and the God who purports to be behind the Bible hold out a credible, legitimate, well-argued, defensible hope that that is not the conclusion of your existence or my existence, that there is something much bigger going on with reality and the life of the mind, the life of the soul, the relationships that we have with each other, and ultimately the relationship, the one with God, that transcends this physical body and what happens in this life. It's a lot to think about. It's something I think we avoid thinking about when stuff is easy and mundane, and something that unfortunately we often only think about when our emotions are raw and we maybe are hurting a little bit. But that's the upside of having weeks like this and moments like this, is it gets you to that honest place where you do wrestle it through. Thanks for hanging with me and letting me process that out loud. I appreciate you letting me do that. Take heart, friends. I'm going to do the same thing. I'll talk to you soon.